what are the implications of THCV for South Africa, and how can we benefit from it?
The implications, I think, of THCV, like other minor cannabinoids, is massive for South Africa, because I think first and foremost, it creates an important base for potential hybridization, looking to enhance the various genetic and phenotypical properties of cannabis. I mean, with THCV, there's a massive implication on the regulation of THC itself, but also because of its linkages to controlling obesity, or potentially suppressing appetite as well, in terms of how it reacts with your different endocannabinoid receptors. But I think the interesting thing for us is that the way that we imagine value creation in the cannabis industry is around simply making flower and then selling it, right? Or extracting it into oils and then selling it, but actually not realizing that much of the value actually that comes from agricultural production comes from the ownership of the genetics that make up the plant itself. And that once you get into the business of figuring out how you might be able to enhance these various properties of plants, then you have a huge market for really great potential pharmaceutical innovation, for hybridizing. I'll give you a simple example. There's a strain called Jack the Ripper, from the US, which has a very high THCV content, and it's because of the breeding work that was done about 3 decades ago, where I think one of the parental genetics was from a sativa plant from Southern Africa, which obviously has very, very high levels of THCV. And what they've been able to do is maximize the content of this, and are at the moment, looking to sell THCV on its own. The price differential on these cannabinoids is massive. So, a CBD, a kilogram wholesale is probably $1,500. You're looking at about double that for THC, but for things like THCV or CBG, you're talking $5,000-$6,000 for a kilogram, just simply because they occur in much smaller quantities. So I think for us, especially at Friends of Hemp and at B Cubed, we see the opportunity actually for thinking about a pharmaceutical revolution in South Africa that's based off of indigenous plants. There is a way in which cannabis works with a number of other indigenous plants, and you can see this in the way in which these are grown, or they naturally grow in the wild. We think cannabis is only the beginning actually of this. We think there's actually much greater discovery that can be made, especially when you look at areas like the Karoo, where you have massive plant species types that have properties that are even more remarkable than cannabis, where cannabis actually could just become the carrier for actually some of these other applications. And this is not conjecture, right, Brett? Because we've seen some of this stuff happen. There was a guy a couple of years ago who discovered an algae that was indigenous to South Africa, and that algae has been used to prevent the decay of cardboard containers that are used to transport fermented products, like a wine. And that's something that's come directly from the natural endowment that we've had. And in the case of South Africa, with the cannabinoid profile that you get from strains that come from here, they are actually a reflection of specific usage, right? That people selectively keep seeds or breed things because they want to be able to have the desired effects. In some cases, people want to be able to have some sort of euphoric high or to be able to relax, and so THC has been really important in that. But in the case of the sociological element that I mentioned around how THCV comes to occur in such high quantities, is that actually for a long time in Southern Africa, you have a history of appetite suppression dating back to the 16th century. There's really interesting work by a professor called Chris Duval, who's at the University of New Mexico, and writes about the ancient provenance of marijuana coming from Africa, and traces actually these interesting kind of patterns where folks would grow seeds, use them, and then keep only what they actually was useful for certain purposes. So when you have large migratory populations that have to move from one place to another and need to be able to stave off hunger, low amounts of THCV can be phenomenally helpful in that instance. It's not to say it's going to be, you know, entirely useful, because we also, what we're finding out from the research is that the dosage is actually particularly important, that at lower dosages of THCV, you kind of have these effects, but actually at higher levels of or higher dosages of THCV, you kind of replicate the THC type of effect, so delta 9, even though, you know, the onset is like significantly faster, the euphoria is much more intense, but also it's a very, very short period of time. So it is really massive, I think, in terms of broadening our perspective on what cannabis development and commercialization can look like, beyond simply, you know, looking at oils and flower as a sort of a value creator.